Hey, Dr. John here with LifeSpa Ayurveda, and today I want to talk about the science of the Gunas. These are the emotional qualities that we have called sattva, rajas, and tamas. Sattva is that ability to be loving, peaceful, and kind for no reason. Rajas is that need for stimulation from the outside world to be happy. And tamas is sort of a kind of introverted state of mind where you could even be somewhat withdrawn or depressed. But I want to talk about the science behind how those manifest. But first, let's dig into how this really starts in Ayurvedic medicine. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel. If you're watching it on my website, please also subscribe to our newsletter and check out our Ayurvedic store on the way out with all of our Ayurvedic herbs. Now, and also lots of articles also are written at lifespa.com and videos on Ayurvedic psychology, but this is going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into that. In Ayurveda, the unmanifest, unified field of intelligence that everything comes from is called Purush. It's the unmanifest, never-changing experience of life. And then there's Prakriti, which is the manifest, changing all the time experience of our life. And it's the manifest world that we've become very attached to, dependent on, and really need that outside world to somehow satisfy us and approve of us and appreciate us to make us feel good about ourselves and our lives, right? So the goal of Ayurveda is really to kind of thin the veil between the manifest and the unmanifest, to begin to realize that there's a non-changing, everlasting, so-called immortal aspect of us that we call the soul that continues on whether we die or live here. There's something that will never end. And to have one foot into that boat is sort of what Ayurveda is really all about. Now, this discussion goes into understanding how the manifest and our addiction to the manifest of the Prakriti begins. And the first manifestation of the manifest world is what's called sattva. Sattva is the loving, peaceful, joyful kind. It's really close to the unmanifest, unbounded field of intelligence, right? So that first manifestation is going to be sattva. And the second manifestation is going to be rajas, which is going to be a little bit more fire-based. Energy, movement, stimulation, drive, things like that. And then the third and final, most kind of detached from the unchanging part of us is tamas, which is more introverted, withdrawn, and retreated. So I want to talk about the science behind them in just a minute. But you should know that this, sattva, rajas, and tamas aren't necessarily good or bad. They're a part of nature, all three of them. A plant, a flower, has all aspects of that. The flower is maybe more of the sattvic part. The stem is the part that holds it in the wind and keeps it moving and allows it to be strong, and that's the rajasic part. And the root is the tamasic part. So we need all three, right? But it's also, from the Ayurvedic perspective, we can get out of balance in the gunas, the sattva, rajas, and tamas. And I invite you to take my emotional body type quiz at lifespa.com, and there's a link in the article associated with this video, and you can take that quiz and find out how much rajas you have, how much sattva you have, and how much tamas you have in many different aspects of your life and your behavior. So you can actually kind of begin to scrub some of those patterns of behavior. And I invite you to start with the tamasic behaviors, because those are the ones that are the most sort of withdrawn and retreated. So let's talk about the science behind this a little bit. And I should say one thing first, that in Ayurveda, the cause of disease, called pragya prad, which means the mistake of the intellect, is when the field of intelligence that we all come from becomes manifest and therefore eventually becomes us. And then we forget that we're part of that underlying field of intelligence. That is the cause of disease. And if you wanted to restore the memory of intelligence or pure consciousness into every cell of our body that may have lost their way, started to think of itself as separate from the underlying field of consciousness, then you'd want to put yourself right at the junction point between field and physiology, or consciousness and matter. And that takes place where the Purush meets prakriti, where the unmanifest meets the manifest, and that first manifestation is sattva. So getting our body to become more sattvic allows us to kind of hone in and focus on the part of us that is non-changing by being as close to that gap as we possibly can. So let's talk about the science. In Ayurveda, sattva is being loving, giving, kind, and caring. We know that when you do that, there's a hormone called the longevity hormone that surges in your body called oxytocin. We also know that when you do that and you're loving, giving, and kind, that the bugs in your gut, the good bugs flourish and the bad bugs, decline. We also know that when you give and care for others and love them and have relationships with others heart to heart, that the telomeres, the protective caps on your DNA, actually lengthen. You produce more telomerase, which lengthens those and gives you more protection from allowing stress to express, underlying genetic predispositions that don't serve us, right? And we also know that there's an epigenetic factor where when you give and love and care and you do it from the bottom of your heart and you don't want anything in return, you're not trying to get some praise out of it. It's called eudaimonic giving. That actually changes the genetic code of the person you're giving it to in a positive way. When you give in a way where you kind of hope they like it and you want some praise and you want to be like, I gave that gift or I donated this and aren't I wonderful? A little bit of that. That's called hedonistic giving, and in the study it showed that it actually had a negative effect on the genetic code of the person you were giving it to. So when you give sattvically, loving and giving and caring for no reason because it's your nature to do so, it's a powerful, powerful thing. It's good for you and better for them. Now, rajasic behavior is when and we all do this when we're young children. We all grow up and we realize that there's toys and there's food and there's sweets and we just go, oh my God, this is great. It activates dopamine. And there's nothing wrong with dopamine, except that we have overstimulated ourselves with dopamine to the point where, in many cases, all of our satisfaction comes from reward chemistry from the outside world. I'm happy when good things happen, and I'm sad when bad things happen. My happiness is dependent on what's happening around me. And that is not really a Vedic concept, because the Vedic concept will tell us that the joy and the love, the sattva, is inside of all of us. And that happiness is our birthright. And no one really has the power to take that away from us. But our culture has done a bang-up job in attracting us through our senses to be attracted to this and attracted to that and addicted to this and addicted to that. And all of a sudden, all of our happiness comes from a newer car or a bigger house or going shopping for this or for that, right? They did a study with a group of women who were in a shoe store and they were buying shoes and they were shopping and they were checking their dopamine as they were shopping for these shoes. And as they were shopping and trying on this shoe and that shoe and this shoe and that shoe, their dopamine levels were rising and rising and rising. They were getting so much reward chemistry from this because they knew they were going to get these new shoes. As soon as they all finally picked their shoe out and they finally went and they swiped their card and they bought the shoe, the dopamine levels crashed, right? And then the body was like, whoa, and then they were all thinking, wow, the brain pulls down the menu. How did I get back up on that mountain again? I felt so good up there, right? And then the brain goes, well, there was a Mrs. Fields chocolate chip cookies, I remember. There was a Starbucks we walked by. There was a Cinnabon. I remember all those places. And then they all are off to the next stimulation, dopamine reward experience, which is a Cinnabon or a cup of coffee or whatever that might be. So this is rajasic behavior. And the problem with rajasic behavior is that the surges create an up and then they create a down. And we go from highs to low. And over time, the studies show that the dopamine receptors can get sort of burnt out to the point where you actually have less dopamine receptors. As we get older, we lose dopamine receptors anyway. So it's sort of like harder to become happy as you're older. That's probably not necessarily has to happen, but in our culture, that's what we see with older folks. They have less dopamine receptors. If you're an addict or you've overstimulated your receptors and you're just pushing the envelope with extreme behaviors and alcohol and addictions and all these things, you can find yourself with less dopamine receptors. And that's the science of tamasic behavior. Tamasic behavior is like I don't have any reward receptors any longer. I've lost my motivation. I don't have the drive that I once had. I don't have the desire that I once had. I'm just feeling like I'm just wanting to retreat, withdraw, escape, and hide away from the world. Like if you were the root of the flower, you'd be under the ground and you'd feel safer there. And that's the metaphor for tamasic behavior. So that's what causes the tamasic behavior. And then we have to recognize those behaviors, and then we can kind of chip our way out of them by taking action to free ourselves. And I put together a free self-inquiry guide, a Ayurvedic critical analysis guide that you can get, and we'll link that to the article associated with this video, where as you kind of go through the emotional body type questionnaire and you see different tamasic behaviors or rajasic behaviors that you don't like or not serving you, you can also access my free self-inquiry guide, which is a step-by-step guide asking you questions that you have to answer and take action based on to free yourself from underlying old patterns of behavior. You know, simply put, there's an old saying that says, to the extent that someone affects you in a negative way or something affects you in a negative way, it's to the extent that it's your karma. Karma means action. So to the extent that something affects you is to the extent that it's an opportunity for us to take action to free ourselves from those old patterns of behavior. Understanding where those underlying patterns of behavior are with a self-inquiry, with the emotional body type quiz, learning your behaviors that are sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic, and then using this self-inquiry guide to free yourself from those patterns is a really cool way to enter into the world of Ayurvedic psychology. And as we all know, at the end of the day, it's this crazy mind of us that gives us the most trouble and causes most of our problems in our life, both mentally, physically, and emotionally. So please check all that out at lifespa.com. Get this article, associated with the video, get our free self-inquiry guide, and download or go to the emotional body type quiz and take that quiz and find out where your rajas and tamasic and sattvic behaviors lie. Thanks for listening. I'm Dr. John Douillard. Do you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe and share.
This recording is brought to you by LifeSpa, where ancient Ayurvedic wisdom meets modern science. Get access to free health video newsletters by Dr. John at lifespa.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.